Wait, before you click away, thinking this is just another wrestling news update, you need to hear what's actually happening behind the curtain at WWE headquarters right now, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about one man's health crisis. This is about the complete dismantling of the most dominant faction in modern wrestling history, the systematic destruction of Roman Reigns' empire, and how one diagnosis has sent shockwaves through an entire industry that will never be the same again. Paul Heyman, the special counsel, the wise man, the greatest advocate professional wrestling has ever known, has been diagnosed with cancer. And I know what some of you are already typing in the comments. You're ready to say this is a work, a storyline, another elaborate WWE fiction. But here's the brutal truth that's going to make you sick to your stomach. This is real. This isn't entertainment. This isn't sports entertainment. This is a man's life hanging in the balance. And WWE knew about this for weeks before telling any of us. Let that sink in for a second. They knew. The company that profits off our emotional investment, that sells us merchandise with his face on it, that books him in segments knowing full well that every appearance could be his last. They kept this from us. And now the entire wrestling world is scrambling to figure out what happens next. Because without Paul Heyman, there is no bloodline. Without Paul Heyman, Roman Reigns is just another guy with a championship. Without Paul Heyman, WWE loses the one creative genius who has been carrying storylines on his back for over 3 decades. Think about that for a moment. Paul Heyman has been the mastermind behind some of the most groundbreaking moments in wrestling history. He built ECW from nothing, turned it into a cultural phenomenon that changed wrestling forever. He gave us the original pallbearer and Undertaker dynamic that defined an era. He transformed Brock Lesnar from a talented athlete into an unstoppable monster that conquered UFC and WWE. He orchestrated CM Punk's rise to legendary status. And just when you thought he'd done it all, he took Roman Reigns from the most hated man in wrestling to the longest reigning Universal Champion in history, crafting a character so compelling that people literally plan their weeks around watching him. And now we're supposed to just accept that this genius, this irreplaceable voice, this man who can tell a story with nothing but facial expressions and a microphone, might not be there anymore. The cancer diagnosis isn't just affecting Paul Heyman's family, it's affecting every single person who works for WWE, every wrestler who's ever cut a promo hoping to be half as good as him, every fan who's ever been captivated by his words. This is the kind of news that makes you realize how fragile everything in this business really is. But here's where it gets even more complicated. And this is the part that's going to make you absolutely furious. WWE has to continue operating. They have television deals worth billions of dollars. They have WrestleMania coming up. They have shareholders expecting profits and networks demanding content. So while Paul Heyman is fighting for his life, fighting a battle that has nothing to do with scripted wins and losses, WWE is already planning what comes next. They're already discussing who replaces him. They're already writing him out of storylines. They're already moving forward as if one of the most important figures in their history is already gone. The corporate machine doesn't stop. It never stops. And that's what makes this whole situation feel so cold, so calculated, so absolutely heartless. Behind closed doors at Titan Towers, executives are having meetings about continuity, about how to pivot the bloodline narrative, about merchandise sales and licensing deals that might be affected. They're talking about Paul Heyman like he's a character that can be recast, a role that can be filled by the next person willing to stand beside Roman Reigns and hold a microphone. But you can't recast genius. You can't replace decades of experience, instinct, and pure creative brilliance with a script and a willing performer. Think about the timing of this. The bloodline story has been building for over 3 years. It's the longest sustained narrative in modern WWE history. Every week, millions of people tune in specifically to see what Roman Reigns and Paul Heyman are going to do next. The tension with Solo Sikoa, the fractured family dynamics, the question of who truly controls the bloodline. All of that hinges on Paul Heyman being there to navigate these treacherous waters. And now, right when the story is reaching its peak, right when WrestleMania season is approaching and the payoffs are supposed to happen, everything is falling apart. Roman Reigns built his entire persona around having Paul Heyman by his side. The tribal chief doesn't exist without the wise men. Every major decision, every championship defense, every moment of vulnerability or strength, Paul Heyman was there orchestrating it, adding layers of complexity that transformed what could have been a simple heel champion into one of the most nuanced characters wrestling has ever seen. Take Paul Heyman away, and you're not just removing a manager. You're removing the voice, the strategy, the emotional anchor that makes everything Roman does meaningful. The chemistry between Roman Reigns and Paul Heyman wasn't manufactured in a writer's room. It was organic, built on mutual respect and understanding of what makes wrestling psychology work at the highest level. When Paul Heyman speaks, you believe every word because he believes it. When he stands behind Roman Reigns, you understand the power dynamic instantly. When he betrays someone or shows loyalty, it carries weight because Paul Heyman has spent his entire career making you care about every single choice his characters make. That's not something you can teach. That's not something you can hand off to the next guy in line, and let's talk about what this means for the wrestlers themselves. Do you think Roman Reigns is okay right now? Do you think he's sitting in his locker room thinking about championship reigns and WrestleMania main events? Paul Heyman isn't just his on-screen advocate. They've worked together for years, building a relationship that goes far beyond what we see on television. This is someone Roman trusts, someone who helped rehabilitate his career when the entire fan base had turned against him. And now he's facing the very real possibility of losing that person. Not to a storyline betrayal, not to a heel turn, but to something far more cruel and random. Remember when Roman Reigns was getting booed out of every building? When fans were throwing beach balls during his matches and chanting for anyone but him? Paul Heyman saw something everyone else missed. He understood that the problem wasn't Roman Reigns the performer, it was Roman Reigns the character. And together, they crafted something unprecedented. They took all that hatred, all that rejection, and weaponized it into the most compelling heel run in decades. That partnership saved Roman's career and elevated him to heights no one thought possible. And Paul Heyman did it not through some magic trick, but through the fundamental understanding of human psychology, storytelling, and what makes audiences invest emotionally in characters. The wrestlers are human beings. We forget that sometimes because we're so caught up in the characters and the storylines. But right now, there are real people backstage at WWE who are devastated. There are young wrestlers who looked up to Paul Heyman as a mentor, who studied his promos, who dreamed of one day working with him. There are veterans who've known him for decades, who remember when he was a young photographer at Madison Square Garden with dreams of changing the wrestling business. All of those people are now confronting mortality in a way that no scripted drama can prepare you for. Guys like Seth Rollins, who worked with Heyman during crucial points in his career. Women like Becky Lynch, who studied Heyman's promos to understand how to command attention with words. Younger talents like Austin Theory and Grayson Waller, who represent the next generation and might never get the chance to learn directly from the master. Every single person in that locker room knows what Paul Heyman represents. He's not just a manager or an on-screen personality. He's living proof that you can make it in this business through intelligence, creativity, and sheer force of will, even if you're not the biggest or the strongest. What makes this situation even more heart-wrenching is Paul Heyman's passion for this business. This isn't a guy who phones it in. This isn't someone who shows up, reads his lines, and collects a paycheck. Every single appearance, every promo, every facial expression is crafted with the precision of someone who genuinely loves professional wrestling more than anything else in the world. He's 59 years old, and he still performs like every segment could be his last masterpiece. And now, tragically, that might actually be true. Watch any Paul Heyman promo from the last year, and you'll see it. The fire is still there. The passion burns as brightly as it did when he was a young promoter, mortgaging his house to keep ECW alive. He cares about every word, every inflection, every moment of silence between sentences. He understands that wrestling isn't just about moves and matches. It's about making people feel something real. And he's been doing that consistently, without fail, for over 30 years. That kind of dedication is rare in any industry. But in professional wrestling, where burnout is common and cynicism runs rampant, it's practically miraculous. Cancer doesn't care about championship reigns or WrestleMania moments. It doesn't care that Paul Heyman still has so much left to give to this industry. It doesn't care that there are dream matches and promos that will now never happen. It doesn't care that an entire generation of fans have never known WWE without Paul Heyman's influence somewhere in the background. Cancer is indiscriminate, cruel, and it's now the biggest opponent Paul Heyman has ever faced. And unlike Brock Lesnar or Roman Reigns, he can't advocate his way out of this one. This is the fight where all his skills, all his intelligence, all his experience in navigating hostile environments and impossible situations, none of it matters. He can't cut a promo on cancer. He can't outsmart it or manipulate it or convince it to change its mind. He's facing the same terrifying reality that millions of people face every year. And all we can do is hope that modern medicine and his own fighting spirit are enough to pull him through. So where does WWE go from here? How do you replace the irreplaceable? How do you continue telling stories when one of your greatest storytellers is fighting a battle that has nothing to do with entertainment? The truth is, you can't. You adapt, you adjust. You do your best to honor what Paul Heyman built, while acknowledging that nothing will ever be quite the same. Maybe they'll bring in another manager for Roman Reigns. Maybe they'll pivot the bloodline story in a completely different direction. Maybe they'll use this real-life tragedy as fuel for even more compelling television. Because that's what this business does. It takes real emotion and amplifies it. But who could possibly fill those shoes? Who in WWE right now has the credibility, the presence, the sheer magnetic charisma to stand next to Roman Reigns and make it work? MVP tried it with Bobby Lashley, and while it was good, it wasn't Paul Heyman level. No one is Paul Heyman level. You could bring back every legendary manager in history, put them all in one segment, and none of them would have the complete package that Paul Heyman brings to the table. Bobby Heenan was incredible, but he's gone. Jim Cornette has the knowledge, but burned too many bridges. Jimmy Hart was entertaining, but never had Heyman's edge. Paul Bearer created an iconic character, but it was specific to one gimmick. Paul Heyman can work with anyone, in any style, in any era, and make it compelling. The financial implications alone are staggering. Paul Heyman segments consistently draw some of the highest television ratings. When he appears, social media engagement spikes. Merchandise connected to his clients sells at premium rates. The Bloodline has been WWE's most profitable storyline in years, generating millions in revenue across multiple platforms. And Paul Heyman has been the linchpin holding it all together. Losing him doesn't just affect the creative side. It affects the bottom line in ways that are going to make shareholders and executives very nervous. And here's something that's going to make you even angrier. There are people, actual human beings, walking around right now, who are already politicking for his spot. In the cutthroat world of WWE, where everyone is fighting for screen time and relevance, Paul Heyman's absence creates a vacuum that ambitious people will try to fill. There are agents, there are producers, there are managers waiting in the wings who see this as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. That's the ugly truth about this business. Even in the face of something as serious as cancer, the show must go on, and people will climb over anyone to get ahead. But none of that changes the fundamental reality that one of wrestling's greatest minds is facing his toughest challenge, and we're all just watching helplessly from the sidelines, hoping for the best but preparing for the worst. This is the moment where the line between performance and reality disappears completely, where we're forced to remember that behind every character, every storyline, every championship reign, there are real people with real lives that don't always have happy endings. Paul Heyman gave us decades of unforgettable moments. He gave us the voice of a generation. He gave us characters that will live forever in wrestling history. The list of his accomplishments reads like a greatest hits compilation of modern wrestling. He brought hardcore wrestling to the mainstream. He created stars out of nothing. He rehabilitated careers that everyone else had written off. He told stories that made grown adults cry, cheer, and believe in the magic of professional wrestling all over again. Think about all the moments we would have missed if Paul Heyman had never existed in this business. No ECW means no indie revolution. No Paul Heyman means Brock Lesnar might have been just another failed UFC fighter trying to come back to wrestling. No Paul Heyman means CM Punk never gets to cut the pipe bomb promo that changed wrestling forever. No Paul Heyman means Roman Reigns is probably doing comedy segments on the mid-card right now instead of being the face of the company. Every single one of those moments, every single one of those careers, every single one of those storylines that we've loved and obsessed over, they all have Paul Heyman's fingerprints on them. Then now all we can do is hope that he gets the chance to give us more. That this isn't the end of his story. That somehow, someway, he beats this thing and comes back stronger than ever. Because wrestling needs Paul Heyman. WWE needs Paul Heyman. We all need Paul Heyman. The industry he helped shape, the careers he helped build, the fans he helped create. We're all connected to him in ways we probably don't even fully understand. His influence is so deeply woven into the fabric of modern professional wrestling that removing him leaves a hole that can never truly be filled. So what can we do? We can support him. We can send positive energy. We can refuse to let this become just another news story that we scroll past on our way to the next piece of content. We can acknowledge that Paul Heyman is more than a character, more than a performer, more than a manager. He's a human being who has dedicated his entire life to making us feel something, to making us care, to making us believe in the impossible. And now he needs us to believe in the impossible for him. He needs us to hope, to pray, to do whatever it is we do when someone we care about is facing the fight of their life. Because that's exactly what this is. The biggest fight of Paul Heyman's life, and for once, we can't just sit back and watch. We have to acknowledge that this matters, that he matters. That wrestling without Paul Heyman is possible but will never be quite as good, quite as meaningful, quite as special as it is when he's there making magic happen week after week. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share this video with every wrestling fan you know. And let's show Paul Heyman that the wrestling world stands behind him in this fight. Because if anyone can beat the odds, it's the man who's been beating them his entire career.